Hello, I'm Malcolm Houslett.
And I'm Janice Baker. What's it like being the organiser of the largest pageant in Australia?
Well, particularly if you started life as an opera singer.
Next on our time.
Our very special guest is Brian Gilbertson. Be my lover.
No, you would never make it as an opera. I know you have a lovely voice.
Well, not today. The voice is flowing away. But you know, our special guest today has a great voice.
Yes.
And has achieved some remarkable things in life. So why don't we just introduce to you Brian Gilbertson. Brian, hello.
Hi, Brian.
Janice, Malcolm, how are you?
Not the first time you've been on our time.
No, I have been here before.
Yes, 2 years ago we talked about the pageant, and we're still going to talk about that today, but we really want to talk to you about you, because you didn't start your life leading a pageant and organising a pageant.
No, but have you always sung? Have you always known that you wanted to be a singer?
I think so. From a very early age, I remember, well, I suppose in very early times it wasn't singing. It was, I used to lie on the concrete floor in the laundry and hum. And what I loved to feel in the summer, which was very, hot, but the laundry floor was cool.
Yes.
I would love to feel the vibration of humming. You could feel it all through your toes, and I have a distinct memory of that. So this was preschool.
You are the first person who said what I always say: if you can't sing from your toes, you really can't sing, because it's got to be a whole body experience.
It's a whole body experience.
When you're standing up, particularly, you feel it in your toe. To me, do you feel it in your toe? Oh, it's because you wear heels. You can't.
What's that? I feel it in my fingers.
Yes. No, feel it in your toes first.
But look, I think you're right. When I've helped people out with their voice, quite often I find that they're quite stiff and they're holding their voice in their upper body. But really, it's about a matter of letting the whole thing vibrate.
Your whole body's the instrument, isn't it,
yeah.
really? So you're laying on the floor in the laundry and...
Well, I think if you look back, that's probably an instinctive thing that I had. I personally think that children are born with the DNA of what they might become.
Yeah.
And as parents, maybe our responsibility is to keep a lookout for that and then try and foster that rather than sort of maybe push them in a different direction. But then I sang and sang and sang, and eventually I have a memory of going to grandparents' houses and being stood in front of the fridge. I don't know why it was the fridge, but I have this distinct memory.
Open the door because you got the light.
Maybe, yeah. I never opened the door.
Oh, you missed out.
But I used to, there I am in front of the fridge, and I would sing for relatives and things like that.
What did you sing? Do you remember the songs?
I don't remember what I sang then. I do remember my grandmother used to always sing, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and things like that, particularly if you're upset or whatever. So I sang in front of the fridge, and then these competitions started happening on television. So I think there was Search for a Star and some other things. And so I would go to my mother and say, I could do that. She'd say, well, you better write. So she found out where to write to, and I had to write a letter.
Yeah.
And then I went and auditioned, and I went on those shows. So I think I was about 10.
I did that too. I did that.
Yeah.
Oh, I think anyway, sorry, your story.
Well, no, but you think about, has anything much changed? Because
no,
these days
now.
they're national rather than local as they used to be.
The prizes must be just bigger. But I think I started, there was a school talent quest, and I wanted to go in the school talent quest. So I sang You're My World, I think, as an audition piece. No, that was the year after. I can't remember what I sang the first year. You Don't Have to Say You Love Me.
So you're singing girls' songs, Brian. This is a bit of a worry.
Yeah, well, I think that the girls' songs suited me because the keys that they were in...
Because you're a tenor.
Yeah, and they're sort of the altos. So at that stage as a boy...
You were in the right.
Although I never sang as a boy soprano, I had quite a big open voice. And so I sang this, and they said, you're too young. So I said, well, what if I can do a piece of poetry? So they let me do a piece of poetry, but they didn't put me in, they put me as a reserve.
Okay.
And so I got to hand the trophy to the winner, which I thought, I suppose that spurred me on to think, well, next year I'm going to sing. So anyway, I sang the next year.
How old do you think you were now?
Oh, around 10-ish.
10, right, okay.
So then I sang at the talent quest, and, these are the lessons you learn in life. I came second in the solo section to a duo.
Yeah,
I could never work that out.
Perfect sense.
But I got the people's vote, so that was important. So getting the people's vote is always important. So that sort of spurred me on. And then at that time, of course, Maria Tomasetti and Tony Roberts had the Bunyip Theatre. And the next thing we did at school, Vincent Plush was a pianist at school, a very brilliant pianist. And he pulled together with Maria and Tony,
Yep.
the children's opera, The Golden Vanity.
Right.
So I became the captain of the Golden Vanity. I know we shall be taken by the foe, and into Turkish slavery we shall all be sold. And it was sort of lines like, gurgle, 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 must we all drown? I can still remember this.
Yes, yes.
It's amazing what
So
you
we did
can
that.
remember,
I
isn't it,
know.
from childhood?
So we did that, and then my voice sort of started to break, so I was advised not to sing at all. So I didn't sing for a couple of years, and then it sort of came back. One morning I woke up, got in the shower, and I was singing. So I thought, oh, it's back. And by that time, I was probably 15 or 16, and the rock and roll industry was starting. So we formed a band. It became our band, actually. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't brilliant. The first show we played at, we were supposed to do an outdoor concert for a school, and it rained, and we thought, oh, we better move the speakers inside, and we picked them up and water poured out of the speakers. We didn't know anything about electricals or anything, so we just put them inside and played. But nothing happened, thank God.
Lucky.
Gosh.
But that's rock and roll, I suppose.
Well,
you
so
could say.
how did you get from a band to opera?
Well, I was playing in the bands for probably 6 or 7 years, and we became pretty good. You know, that was around the time of Cold Chisel. I mean, we played at some of those shows, and I would chat to Jimmy Barnes. He probably doesn't remember me now, but he was fresh off the boat at that time, and was playing with Cold Chisel. We were great mates of Les Kazmarek, who was the bass guitarist in the original Cold Chisel. So we did all of that, and then somebody gave me a piece of music because they'd heard me sing, and they were short of tenors for a festival opera. And so
This is the Festival of Arts here in South Australia?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was always interested in musicals, so I teed up with, I auditioned for Mayfair with Verdon and Doris Williams and Verdon Williams, and scored the role in Bells Are Ringing. I had to get some singing lessons at that time because rock and roll I could take the notes way up high and scream them out and there wasn't a problem, but to actually sing the musicals I was probably 4 or 5 notes lower than that and struggling.
Okay.
It's
Right.
it's just a slightly different way of doing things. You've got to be a little bit more beautiful in your voice and things like that.
Yep.
So I took lessons, that helped me get through that. Somebody heard me there and said, we need a tenor. Now I hadn't been conducted or anything like that, so we did this incredible piece out at St Peter's Cathedral at North Adelaide. There was a conductor with a book about so big. Lyndon Piddington asked me to do this.
Lyndon, I remember Lyndon.
So I said to Lyndon, I'll stand next to you, but you've got to tell me when to come in because I have no idea what that guy's doing up there. And we had drum sections all around the cathedral. Elizabeth Salisbury was up there with a choir up the top in the loft. We had a choir on the stage. I was one of the soloists in front. They had soloists up there, and this guy was conducting like this.
Gosh.
And so every now and again, Lyndon would then go, and I just memorised where I had to come in and what I had to sing, and he'd go like that, 2, 3,
But how
4,
did
and
that
I'd
get
sing.
you overseas?
Gosh.
Then somebody in that show heard me sing and said, you should be doing opera. So I then went into one chorus for the opera and sang that, and I then asked a tenor in that opera, you know, how do you advance yourself? And he says, you've got to go to Europe. Now, by this time, I'd been 6 years in the law, so I'd gone through uni, become a lawyer. I was practicing as a lawyer with my own practice. We were very successful, and my wife, Julie, had an opportunity to take a year and go and work in the United Nations.
Right. So that makes perfect
and
sense.
to write a report. So we thought, all right, well, where would we go? So we looked at Vienna, and oddly enough, the Hochschule für Musik, Darstellende Kunst in Vienna was recommended to me by this tenor as the place to find voice teachers, even ahead of the Conservatoire in Vienna. So I wrote to them and I said, you know, this is a recommendation from so-and-so. Guila Tiva was over in Europe at the time, and I spoke to Guila and she put me onto Jack Poppel, who was at the Volksoper in Vienna. wrote to him. We then worked out that I could get into the Hochschule on recommendation. Julie was able to go there, so I sold my legal practice and we went. That was quite difficult.
That's the taking the risk, isn't it, and following a dream?
Gosh.
Yeah. So that was fairly difficult because it was interesting that in Australia we were predominantly told, you know, if you're a lawyer and you're being successful, why would you do
yes.
that?
Well, because, Brian, you wouldn't have been able to wear a costume like this.
That's true. Well, as soon as we hit Vienna, they would say
I should
to
just
us,
make it clear you're in the male costume.
I'm on the left side. Yeah. Is that the left on the top? That's Maria on the right. She was the one. No, sorry, Elizabeth. That one is. She was a wonderful soprano over there. That was my first operatic role in Vienna. But that was after a year and a half, where my teacher refused to let me sing anywhere.
Right.
We just worked, and so I would hardly get a phrase out like "Dies Bild, nein."
No, really.
Dies Bildnis, nein, Bild must. Often. I'm sitting there thinking, what does he mean by
what
often?
does she mean? Yeah, I get it.
Because I had to study the German as well.
But then, of course, you came back to Australia, and we'll be back in a moment to find out the rest of Brian's story and how he ended up being in charge of the pageant.
Brian, our best there, it was just beautiful. So from there, when you did the opera in Europe, what brought you back to Australia?
Look, family reasons brought us back to Australia, which, you know, it was pretty intense over there working, and I was pretty well geared up to do some serious stuff over there.
How long were you there?
Just over 2 years.
It was 2.
And by that time I'd auditioned, I got that first role, I got a couple of other roles, I toured off to Palm Beach with an opera company from Vienna, did some concerts
So close.
and some oratorio and things like that. So my teacher was very disappointed when I left because he had me lined up with agents and things to do things. But for family reasons we came back, and we came back in an off-season, so all of the roles in Australia had been cast. So I then sought out whatever was available to keep the voice working.
Yes.
You know, it was a very different process learning to sing over there to here. I got a role as Blind, Dr. Blind, the deaf person in, what's the opera, the bat, the Die Fledermaus.
Oh, Die Fledermaus.
And David Cram heard me there. And David Cram was from the State Opera, the conductor there, and so he immediately put me into La Bohème, and then I probably did 40 to 50 roles in Australia. But
Well,
then
we've got
also
some
went back
shots here
overseas.
of some of the characters that you played. So who
So
were
that's
you there?
Blind.
Because you're young, but you're old.
Yeah, well, that's the first Blind. I mean, the amazing thing is that I was Spieltenor im lyrischen Fach. So Spieltenor is character tenor.
I don't know what he just said, but I hope it was all right at 7 o'clock.
FACH. So this is a bit of the cabaret sort of musicals
Cabaret
work.
you, yes.
So that was great fun as well. So I was sort of mixing between the opera and musicals
stuff, I suppose.
and other things.
But this wasn't.
No, this was great. You know, Bill Gillespie was the manager of the State Opera there, and he gave me a lot of license to create characters. So this was the second time I did Goro in Butterfly.
L'ufficiale del registro, i parenti, il vostro console, la fidanzata, che si tira all'anno e matrimonio in manco. E con molti parenti lo scuocerà la donna Luzzo Pozzo, che non ci negherà di sua presenza. Le cugine, le piante ascendenti, e di collaterali, o due nozine. Quanto alla discendenza, protegeranno assai, vostra grazia e la bella butterfly.
So that was pretty special because young Harrison, my son, got the role of Sorrow in that one as well. So we were in that opera together, so it was terrific. And then this is sort of characters that I played. I think that was from Falstaff. And you know, you can
about the
see,
nose.
yeah, it's a bit bulbous. This was Lucia di l'Amore So I was a bit of a nasty character, and we went for the nose again, but in a different way. This one was a later version of La Bohème as the Jewish landlord who gets drunk and then they kick him out and don't pay his fee. And I suppose this was one of the greatest experiences was singing in the ring cycle. So this was the first ring cycle. And
we've got some vision of that, haven't we? So let's have a look at that. Wow, that's amazing, Brian.
And can I just add, in some of those operas, I was in the chorus.
You were, Jennifer.
How amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
How amazing.
Great experience.
So, Brian, so you had this whole circle, and before we talk about the other part of your life, you've got the band back together.
Yeah, well, I think that's the beauty of the Fringe. You know, the Adelaide Fringe is growing and growing and growing, and it's very simple to get into the Fringe. You know,
Yes,
it's an open,
Yep.
open cart. So we were sitting around one day and thought, well, what if we brought the band back together and told the story about what happened in the 60s and 70s when we were a band, because it was pretty lively.
But were
then.
you there, if you remember?
Well, we don't remember. We made it up. But look, it was terrific. We got back together again.
How many in the band?
Well, we expanded a little bit. We had, I think there's about 4 of us from the original band, and we've actually added some instrumentation.
Yep.
We had Quentin Ayres come back in. Quentin's a great musician in Australia, and I've done it. He's produced all of my recordings. So we got him to come back in pretty much as the orchestra, and also he's got a great voice for rock and roll. So we did the show at the Fringe. We put in some money and thought, well, you know, if nobody turns up, that's our investment.
Yeah.
We sold out. We were actually the
Wow.
quickest Fringe show to sell out
How
in
brilliant.
history.
That's because you're good with your own
Wow.
We were
marketing
quick
too.
to sell out.
Fantastic.
So then we put it on the second year. The third year we created the Australian scene, not the South Australian scene, and that's so all of the shows have sold out. We've been having a ball. Very
What are you
different to singing
doing
opera.
next year?
So in the Fringe next year, we're doing the second show of the season that we did in 2017 about Australian rock and roll music in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
But we're doing it with a twist. So we're shifting. We changed it a bit the second time.
Not one of those twists. Let's twist again.
We should talk about the pageant.
Yes, we should.
Because
So,
you
Brian, all of these things have happened in your life, and then somebody must have phoned you to say,
who grabbed you for that job?
Well, it came to a point of time where in the opera you have to travel. And my children got to an age where I wanted to spend time with them.
Yes.
And with Julie, so we decided, okay, what do I do now? And I'd had 20 years in the opera by that time, so 20 years has passed in the last 7 minutes.
And you didn't want to go back to law then?
No.
That wasn't calling you
I've
back?
still got a legal practicing certificate, but I don't practice. It's probably...
because you haven't got it right?
No, you know, look, I enjoyed aspects of the law, but this is in my blood, so this is what I pursued. And so I thought I would look for something that was within the theatrical creative area.
Yeah.
And somebody put this on my desk and said, do you realise this position's come up? It's only the 5th director of the pageant, and it would enable your creativity. You could bring theatre into the pageant. Why don't you apply for that?
Brian, a quick question. What's the story about, is it the beginning of the pageant or is it when the pageant almost didn't happen? And just for people interstate, the pageant, it's the largest in Australia, isn't it?
It's the largest in the world of Christmas pageant.
Of a Christmas pageant. So it's, what's it called now?
Credit Union Christmas pageant.
Right. And this happens obviously every year, but it originated as the John Martin's Christmas pageant.
Correct.
And there's one year that it almost, I think this is the story, it almost didn't happen because something happened, but Mrs. John Martin said, you've got to make it happen.
Don't know that story. I do know that, you know, you can imagine the expense of putting on something like this. But, you know, that was sort of incorporated, as I understand it, within the John Martin's budget. It was something that they did.
That was a department store here in South Australia as well. So for those of you who have been to South Australia, particularly at this time, the streets are literally full of people and the pageant snakes its way through the different streets.
So, you know, it's right on us. 10th of November, 9:30, we blow the whistle and start.
Yes.
Yes,
exactly. Pretty full on.
Yeah, so we're
it's lucky we've got you here on the very week of.
Yeah, and it's the 86th year of it. So, you know, it's been around for 86 years. It shows tradition. You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the pageant.
was born then, that's amazing.
1933.
Is it every year there's a new float? Because I did see recently that there are 2 new floats this year.
Yeah, we'll have 3, so
3.
1 to go to announce. But usually it's 3 to 6, something around there.
Do you drop some off then, or do you keep adding?
We do. So it's a combination of accounting and also creativity. So, you know, what's due in the pageant? Is it something for boys, something for girls, something for the grandparents? What's the whole picture looking like? But, you know, we start that sort of discussion in the September of the year before, and then we work through we get through pageant, and then we work through the next year to build.
Wow.
But this year we had, of course, the big train that's coming out at the very beginning, and, you know, that was more expensive than one float, so we only did 3 floats this year. But when that train comes down, the Credit Union Pageant Express, when that opens the pageant this year, that will be wow factor time.
Do you sleep all week?
When I sleep like a log. I have this process where I go to bed and I put my mind in a certain place and I'm gone very deeply. But, you know, in the process leading up to pageant the last 2 months, you know, I can sometimes be only getting 2 hours sleep a night, and other times, you know, 6 and 5 and 4 and 3.
Well, we've got a great shot of you sort of starting the pageant here. I'm assuming you're actually announcing something in this shot.
That might be the countdown.
Aha.
So at the very beginning, and it was obviously a wet pageant that was taken.
Yes.
But, no, that was the year. It just downpoured. This is about theatre, you know. We got the gospel guys out there singing, and we were on the tail end of this cloud that was going to come across the whole city, but it shifted north. We got the very tail end of it. You could almost see it go over. And it just went whoop. And Gospo gathered in together, kept singing all the way through it.
Yeah.
It lasted for about 3 minutes. They kept singing, and on the show went.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, look, we're going to keep talking. Pity you can't hear this bit, but we'll be back with Brian to finish off and a few extra stories. Stay with us. We've got the leader of the parade.
Pageant.
Well, it is, I suppose. America would be more of a parade, I suppose, you'd call it.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing because pageants are normally associated with sort of beauty contests and things, but it's also associated with nativities.
That's true. How long is the pageant? How long does it take? If you're in a fixed point, how long does it take to go through?
The beautiful police greys take about 45 to 47 minutes to get from start to finish. As the pageant spreads out, it gets a little bit longer, so 48 to 50 minutes, most other floats. And so the whole thing is about an hour and a half. And
it's broadcast on the Nine Network?
Broadcast on the Nine Network.
So people can see it live across Australia or just in South Australia?
Yes, you can see it live, and then there are broadcasts across Australia, and also we've got broadcast on Christmas morning across Australia.
That's right. You do.
Yeah, that's the perfect day too, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have such fond memories as a child sitting on my father's shoulders, watching the pageant go by and feeling that they were stationary and we were moving. Do people ever say that to you? When something's constantly moving past you, it almost feels like you're going that way if they're going that way. And I often feel if the kids must feel that when they're sitting.
People in the first pageant, we've had them there for some of the celebratory pageants, and they said that the public in that first pageant didn't know what to do. They didn't know whether to stand or whether to walk with. But they all ended up in Rundle Mall. So if you go to the library and look at some of the photos in there, it's just jam-packed. And they've all got their fedoras on and dressed for Sunday.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much. Just giving us a touch of your life and your story. What are you going to do when you grow up? You've got 10 seconds.
Live.
So you're not going to really retire.
Or is it
anything.
live, love, laugh and be happy?
Oh, all of those things. And listen, we'll see you next time while we're living and
Yes.
laughing, won't we?
Take care.
And keep yourself nice till next time we see you. Bye.